Here's the irony. I find myself wanting to persuade you into something different, and I know that often that's not what you need. Often when we try to persuade, it can push people to rebel against what we're trying to say, or it can push people to want to hold their perspective even tighter because it feels threatening. We want to preserve an idea that we are right. So I'm not going to push against that. I'm actually going to say, if you really believe what you're saying, if you really believe that your relationship is not different, then you need to live it, not prove it by trying to convince. Hello, and welcome to the Complex Couples Podcast. I'm Heidi. I'm a couples therapist and relationship coach specializing in mixed orientation marriages and mixed gender identity relationships. Whether you're just discovering this reality or you've been on this journey for a long time, this is the space where your marriage matters, your values matter, and your choices matter. Let's dive in. Hello, I'm so glad you're here and that you've decided to join me today for this episode. I want to talk about the question that I get asked a lot by spouses, and that is, how do I convince my spouse that our marriage is not that different? And generally what they're saying is something like, everyone's attracted to other people. It's that the subject is different in our marriage and it's what you choose that matters. Or every marriage involves limits, sacrifice, competing desires, and ours is no different. And I will say, I tend to agree that your marriage is not that different, but there's a complication with the phrase of, how do I convince my partner? Because the second I go into a position of trying to convince them, I might be losing track of their thoughts, their feelings. I might lose curiosity and begin judging their position rather than actually being open and curious and figuring out more about it. So this makes a lot of sense to me, why we would go to trying to persuade. When you've been married a long time, or even a few years, when you love someone and you really enjoy your life with them, or when you've had children or grandchildren together, it's going to make sense that the fact that they view your relationship as different, maybe other, or might see it as some obstacle that they cannot or do not want to overcome, it's going to feel like a threat. So I understand how scary it can be to feel like your partner has a different perspective on this than yours. It can be a really, really scary position to feel like they view this as different and something insurmountable. But here's the irony. I find myself wanting to persuade you into something different, and I know that often that's not what you need. Often when we try to persuade, it can push people to rebel against what we're trying to say, or it can push people to want to hold their perspective even tighter because it feels threatening. We want to preserve an idea that we are right. So I'm not going to push against that. I'm actually going to say, if you really believe what you're saying, if you really believe that your relationship is not different, then the question becomes, how will I handle myself in light of this? Because if your relationship is truly the same as most, then what you're confronting is what every marriage confronts. And that is that you have differences of opinion that seem insurmountable. You have different viewpoints that are so different that it seems impossible to get past them in any way that could maybe preserve your relationship. And this is true in every marriage. Every marriage is going to come up against points of disagreement that feel like they cannot be overcome. And the question then becomes, how do I want to behave in light of that? You might ask yourself questions like, what do I want here? What does my partner want? What are they telling me? Are they telling me that they feel this is impossible because they want something different and I'm refusing to see it because I want something my way? It's really being able to sift through the questions that get more to, what do each of us want? Can we find a way to both get what we want? Or is that impossible? And do we need to face the fact that only one of us is going to get our way in this and determine how we want to behave in light of that. In other words, what I'm saying is if you really believe your marriage isn't that different, it's not different from most other marriages, then you need to live it, not prove it by trying to convince. You need to live in a way that says, my marriage is not that different. I'm confronting the same choices most people face, and I get to decide how I'm going to navigate that. And I would say the first step on that is actually getting to a position where you can be more open to a different perspective. It's very tempting to go into a position of my position is right and their position is wrong. But the reality is you can both find things to back up your perspective, and you will. That's human nature. We really, really want to be right, and we will go to great lengths to prove we are right. And so if it becomes an argument about who's right or wrong, you might be in an endless cycle of trying to persuade the other person or them trying to persuade you while neither of you is actually really listening to what the other is saying. If you see it as, hey, they have a perspective that's valuable and I have a perspective that's valuable, how can I settle myself down enough to listen to their perspective and better understand it? You might start to make a little more progress. That's not to say you might save something if someone's convinced that this is not possible. Recognizing that you may have to face that that's where they are and that's where they're going to stay is part of the process. But settling yourself down enough to listen to what is true for that person can help you determine how you want to proceed. So one of the things that's really crucial here is the idea of freedom. The freedom of choice is really, really essential, of feeling like we have a choice. And so that's one of the reasons when someone is pressuring us to view things differently, we feel constrained. We might feel like we have to do something different. It's going to push on the ability to feel free in the relationship. And that's a really scary thing, I understand, because if you offer freedom, they may not choose what you want. It takes a lot of courage to offer freedom like that. You're going to need the courage to know that you're going to be okay no matter the outcome. And this is, I'm not going to pretend that what I'm saying here isn't actually incredibly, incredibly difficult, because what I'm saying here is that I'm allowing myself to be open to someone else's desires when it threatens pretty much everything I believe in. If I believe in, say, eternal marriage, and I believe that my partner is not on that same page, it's going to threaten the foundation on which I stand, because it's bumping up against something that's foundational to my religious beliefs or my upbringing. And so allowing space for them to see this differently than you can feel like letting go of something much bigger. I feel like I cannot talk about this without bringing in faith, because I think one of the only ways that I have managed to do this at times when I felt it is needed is to recognize that there was someone else who went before me, and in my beliefs, a savior who went before me, who gave up his own desires to do the will of his Father. And that process had to be excruciating, and it also had to be extremely rewarding to know what it was all for. Now, it's difficult to see the end from the beginning, but if you can hold space for trying to learn to love like Christ or like God or any other loving being that you believe in, that this is your space for learning how to do that, you might be able to see the value in it. Otherwise, I think you're more likely to choose anger and resentment and hatred because it just feels so warranted and it's so easy to justify it here. But if you want something better, if you're actually looking for genuine connection with your partner rather than fearful control, you're going to allow space for another person's autonomy and reality that is maybe different than yours. And that means being able to listen to them and being able to consider their point of view and make a decision from there. And we'll talk a little more how to do that in a bit. But I want to share a story just to make this a little more concrete. So often Daniel and I would see friends who ended up getting divorced, and I would be hearing things about how they navigated that and their anger at their partner and how difficult they were making things for their partner because all of a sudden they didn't have a reason to be cooperative, right? They were cooperative in the past to try to preserve the relationship, but the relationship was no longer on the line. So they had no reason to cooperate. And I really agreed with them, quite frankly. And I told Daniel, if you ever divorce me, I will make your life a living hell. I would not be cooperative. I would make his life miserable. I would take him for everything he was worth, and I would make it so difficult. I wasn't going to play nice if that was the path that he chose. Well, one day, Daniel and I were reading a book on marriage, and we got to a section on love and loss and the ability to lose a relationship and how that impacted your ability to love deeply. And we were talking about that a little bit, but I felt him prickle. I just felt him kind of stiffen up. And I asked him what was going on for him when we read this. And he explained to me how whenever we talked about the possibility of ending our relationship, that I was very threatening and that I was very clear in my warnings to him. And I started to realize how it wasn't a very convincing way to get him to stay in a loving way. My threats were more about getting him to stay in a compulsive way, in a way that did not push for agency, but rather pushed for him to comply so that I would get what I wanted. But what I really, really wanted from him was genuine affection. I wanted him to want to be with me. And I didn't want him to just stay because he felt like it would be too much to leave. Like he wouldn't want to tolerate what happened after he left. So I reconsidered this position, and I determined that actually I did care about what he wanted, and I didn't want to pressure him in this way. So eventually I told him, hey, you know what? You are your own person. I love you very much and I want you to stay here. That's my desire. But I am not going to punish you if you choose something else. I don't want to be that kind of person. I don't want to retaliate or make your life miserable because I don't think that's the kind of person I want to be. And I will do my best to do what is fair and to treat you with respect and dignity no matter what your choice is. Essentially, I wanted to learn to love him better no matter what the outcome. And that meant standing by the fact that there would be consequences, but that I could do that with reason and dignity and respect and not hatred and punishment and disdain. And honestly, I think something shifted in us that day when I made that decision. And I don't know if this will shift things for you, but I also know that I like that version of me, that is much closer to who I want to be. Now, whether or not I can live by that, if this were to actually happen, that's a whole different story. And if that's what you're living right now, I can't pretend to understand, if my ideals would meet reality. So I just want to say I'm not in a position to judge that and how you're behaving, but it's something you may want to consider. So what I often see is people swinging between two extremes when they're pushed into positions where they may have a different position than their partner. One is they become really rigid. They really think, I'm right, you're wrong. How could you think this? And they become more punishing, more hostile, controlling. And that punishment rarely makes a relationship more desirable. So it really gets them the opposite of what they want. And it imposes upon the freedom factor. The other extreme that I see is when people they actually collapse. They self-abandon. And this sounds more like, we can open the marriage. I'll stay no matter what. I'll accept whatever you're willing to give me. So the problem with that is it abandons you in the process. The problem with this is not flexibility, it's giving yourself up to avoid loss. It's a fear-based response to try to keep things the way they are, but it's not solid enough. And ironically, one of the things we're attracted to as humans is solidity. So it actually undermines your desirability in a way that you may not anticipate. What you really need is a combination of solidity and flexibility. This is another principle that comes from David Schnarch, but a solid, flexible self. Solidity is your ability to remain connected to your values, your sense of self, while being open and understanding the perspective of someone else. So you're also flexible. You're able to maybe shift as needed, but not to extremes. And you're able to make space for both of you. So healthy flexibility would sound like, I can hear your reality without losing myself. I can take that into consideration and understand your perspective and recognize that I can't persuade you to do anything different. And I can determine what my choice is going to be in light of what these beliefs are. So in conclusion, if you have ever had the question, how do I convince my partner that our marriage is not that different? It likely means that you're seeing evidence that your partner is struggling to believe that they can have what they deeply desire within your relationship. And if you have a desire to keep your marriage intact, that can be a very gut-wrenching reality. Going against your instincts on this will be difficult. Trying to open up to their perspective rather than trying to shut it down or persuade is going to be a difficult choice. But just try allowing room for the possibility that they may genuinely experience the relationship differently than you do, and ask yourself what it would take to accept that. What will it take for me to recognize that they want something different than me? And how can I get myself in a more solid position where I could actually accept that reality rather than fight against it, and do it in a way that is authentic to who I want to be? Maybe you prefer punishment, maybe you prefer anger and blame, and I can say I understand that. But maybe you find yourself determining that you want to determine how to allow consequences without that kind of thing at play. Of course, there's consequence to every choice. I'm not suggesting you eliminate those. I think that consequences are a natural part of choice, but being able to tolerate what you're seeing and allow your partner their choice as much as you want your choice, it can be a rewarding experience. You truly are stepping into a love that does not exist very much in the wild. I mean, we hear about a savior or a God who loved us that much, but we have tremendous difficulty offering that kind of love to someone else, especially when it is not being reciprocated. I guess a good way to say this is living a higher law, and it's not easy to do, and a lot of people don't choose it, and I can understand that. So I hope that this is helpful to you today. What I really want to close with is, whether you choose it or not, you're still valuable. Your partner's still valuable. You both matter, and your worth is not dependent on your behavior. When you believe that you can face anything, you're less likely to be afraid. So figuring out what it is that you're afraid to face here and how you could be more prepared to face it might help you in this journey. I wish you all the best. This is a very hard question to ask, a heavy topic. I hope you'll go watch some funny, YouTube video or something after this, or listen to something amusing, take you away. You need to dip in and out of this area. It can be all consuming. So give yourself some space to process, but also give yourself some space to put it aside and do something different, do something fun if this is your situation. And I hope you have a great week. I am in the process of developing materials. I have a workshop that is available if you want to learn more about coming up against some of these choices. Feel free to sign up for that workshop at my website. It's www.complexcouplescoaching.com. And you can go to the tab that says workshop, or I have coaching, both individual and couples coaching available. If you're interested in that, there's a tab for that as well. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.